All right, so you're trying to decide between a monolithic and a microservices architecture for your software project.
Big decision.
Yeah, it's a classic dilemma.
It is.
And you
Hmm?
sent over some really interesting articles to help sort of break it all down.
Yeah,
So consider this your crash course in software architecture.
that's right.
We're not just going to define the terms here. We're going to really try to give you a feel for which approach might be best for you, given your priorities and
For
goals.
you, that's the key here. Yeah.
Exactly.
What do you need? Right. So you can walk away feeling confident
Absolutely.
and apply these concepts.
Let's kick things off with monolithic architecture. Imagine like a trusty, old-school Swiss Army knife.
Okay.
Got everything you need in one compact package.
Right.
That's kind of the beauty of monolith.
Mm.
Simple, straightforward, everything's neatly contained.
Yeah, and that inherent simplicity, that can be a huge advantage, especially when you're, laser focused on getting an MVP out the door, right? You need speed, you need agility in those early stages. And a monolithic structure, it just delivers that beautifully.
Because who wants to waste time like wrestling with complex configurations when you're just trying to validate a big idea?
Exactly. You don't, right. Plus, when everything's in one place, debugging and testing, it becomes so much more streamlined. It's like, think of it, troubleshooting a single machine, right? Versus trying to pinpoint an issue across a whole network of interconnected devices.
Makes sense. But
Mm.
what happens when your project starts to scale? Like imagine that online store you built suddenly gets swamped with customers during a huge flash sale.
Hmm.
Can that single server handle the pressure? Or does it like buckle under the weight?
Yeah. And that's the trade-off with monoliths, right?
I see.
That simplicity, it can become a liability as you start to grow. Scaling a monolithic application, it's like trying to expand a single-family home into a skyscraper. You hit these structural limitations. You can't get there from here.
So if monoliths are like the Swiss Army knife of software architecture,
Okay.
what's the analogy for microservices?
Let's see. Think of a modern city
Okay.
with specialized buildings, offices, residences, power plants. Each building functions kind of independently, right?
Right, yeah.
But they're all interconnected to form this intricate, this bustling ecosystem.
Okay.
That's microservices.
Okay, so each service is like a mini application
Exactly.
responsible for a specific function.
Yep,
And they all communicate with each other to deliver the overall functionality.
that's it.
So instead of one massive building trying to do it all, you've got this network of specialized structures, each handling its own thing. I can see how that kind of modularity would make scaling a lot easier.
It does, yeah. If one service experiences a surge in demand, you can scale it up independently, right? It doesn't affect the rest of the system.
Like adding more servers to handle online orders during that big sale without touching the system that manages like customer reviews.
Right.
Everything keeps humming along.
Exactly. Yeah, and this granular control, it gives you incredible flexibility. You can update or modify individual services without having to redeploy the entire application.
Nice.
But, and this is crucial, right? This flexibility, it comes at a cost.
Okay.
Increased complexity.
So we've got simplicity versus scalability, flexibility versus complexity. It's starting to sound like choosing between a cozy cabin in the woods and a high-rise apartment in the city.
Right.
Both have their pros and cons, but the quote-unquote right choice really boils down to your specific needs and priorities.
Exactly. Your context, your needs, your priorities. That's what we're gonna unpack next. What are those key factors to consider?
Love it.
So you can decide which path aligns best with your project goals.
Okay, so we've laid out the core differences
Yeah.
between, monoliths and microservices.
Right.
But now comes like the million-dollar question.
Yeah. How do you
Actually decide
Yeah, which one's
which one's right for your project?
right, exactly. And you sent over a great article that really digs into this.
Okay.
And one of the key takeaways I got from it was that there's just no one-size-fits-all answer, right?
No.
It depends. It's about,
Like what? Give me some examples.
sure, like team size and experience. That plays a huge role.
Okay.
Managing a microservices architecture is just inherently more complex. It's
Yeah.
like the difference between running a small bakery, right?
Okay.
And managing a giant chain of restaurants.
Right.
Both can be successful,
Right.
but they require totally different levels of,
Orchestration.
orchestration, expertise, all that.
So if you're working with like a smaller team or
Mhm.
one that's maybe newer to these concepts, maybe starting with a monolith makes more sense.
Absolutely. And you can always transition to microservices later as your team, grows and gains more experience. And in
Mhm.
fact, the article highlighted several companies that did just that.
Interesting.
Right. So it's not this like either or choice for life.
Right.
It's about choosing the right architecture for the right stage,
For where you are.
for where you are in your project.
I like that.
Yeah. And speaking of stage, right, scaling,
Yeah.
another crucial factor to consider.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you anticipate rapid growth? Are you building an application that needs to handle like massive spikes in
Sure.
traffic?
Because that little bakery
Yeah,
is going to struggle if it suddenly becomes like the hottest spot in town,
exactly. Microservices, they're designed to handle that kind of growth.
Right.
And one of the articles even gave this example of a company, I think it was, they switched to microservices after their monolithic architecture basically crumbled during a Black Friday sale.
Oh, no.
They learned the hard way that scalability isn't just about like handling the growth, it's about avoiding these costly downtimes. Like it's got to be resilient.
Yeah, you need that system to be strong.
You need it to be strong.
Okay, so team size,
Yeah.
experience, expected growth.
Yep.
Got it. Anything else? Anything else we should be thinking about?
Cost,
Oh, right, of course.
especially for startups, right, or projects with limited budgets.
Right.
Microservices, they offer huge advantages. We talked about them. Scalability, flexibility.
Sure.
But they do come with higher upfront cost development, infrastructure.
It's like comparing the rent in that cozy cabin
Yes.
versus that high-rise apartment,
Exactly.
in the city.
Exactly. You got to weigh those long-term benefits against what you can afford right now.
Right.
If cost is a major, major concern.
Yeah.
A well-designed monolith might be the smarter way to go initially.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about some of the decision-making factors,
Yeah.
but I think our listeners probably, wants to know how this plays out in the real world.
Sure.
You mentioned companies transitioning. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, let's get concrete.
And who are some of the, the big players, the ones that are doing it well?
The big dogs, yeah. So you gave us two really good examples to dig into, Prime Video and DoorDash. Let's start with Prime Video.
Okay, so Prime Video, they've got, what, like zillions of movies and TV shows?
There's a lot.
I can't even imagine, like, the amount of streaming traffic they have to handle. That's got to be intense. What made them go with microservices?
So they actually started with a monolith.
Really?
Way back when they were mainly a DVD by mail service.
Oh, right.
But as they transitioned, into streaming and they started experiencing this like crazy growth, they just realized their monolith couldn't handle it. It just couldn't keep up.
It's like trying to, I don't know, scream a 4K movie over dial-up or something.
Right. The infrastructure was not ready.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
They were dealing with like slow loading times, frequent outages, not a good look when you're trying to, provide a good customer experience.
For sure.
So they made this big decision, right? To break down that monolith into microservices.
Okay, so big question. Did it work?
It was a game changer. One of the articles you sent, it said they saw way less downtime and they were able to handle these like huge spikes in traffic, like no problem.
Nice.
Oh, and they could release features way faster too, because they weren't stuck with this like massive monolith code base anymore.
It's like they traded in their dial-up for fiber optic and everything just started, like, zooming along.
Exactly. And get this, they're not the only ones. DoorDash, the food delivery company.
DoorDash, sure.
They started with a monolith too.
Interesting.
And then they went the microservices route. Their thing was, as they expanded into new cities and added more restaurants, they needed something more flexible to deal with all the different menus and payment systems and delivery networks.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a nightmare for a monolith to handle.
Whole nightmare.
So how did microservices help them, like, manage all that?
Well, they could break down their platform into smaller services.
Okay.
So they had like a separate service for onboarding restaurants, another one for processing orders, another for delivery logistics. You get the idea. They could update and scale these parts independently without messing with the entire system.
So it's like, instead of one chef trying to make every single dish for every single order,
right.
you've got this whole team of, like, specialized chefs.
Yes, exactly. And here's the takeaway. Even Amazon, right, which owns Prime Video,
Yeah.
they started with a monolith.
Okay.
It's totally okay to start simple and then, kind of let your architecture evolve as your company grows and your needs change.
So we've talked about the differences between these two approaches. We've looked at how some really successful companies have made these decisions, and we've even gotten into some of the things that you should be thinking about as you're figuring out what's right for your project. Before we wrap up this deep dive, any final words of wisdom?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no right or wrong answer. It's about figuring out what works best for you. You know your project, you know what you need.
I love that. It's about making smart choices for your specific situation. Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive. Listener, thanks for joining us on this exploration of monoliths and microservices. It's been